Thank you, brother. Couple things. Will you just kind of silence your phone? Because I don't want to have any quacks going off in the middle of any. Oh, right. So, I'm sorry, I'm really short.
I got you. I got you.
Okay. Robert.
Our hands this day as we join together as single adults in this conference. We express unto thee, Heavenly Father, our gratitude for Brother Wilcox and his message. We're grateful for the chance to strengthen the friendships that we feel for each other. We ask thee to help us as we strive to reach out and to uplift and encourage one another. We're grateful for Brother Whiting and his willingness to come and share with us today. Things he has prepared may touch our heart, inspire us to do better and to be better. We're grateful for those who have worked to put on this conference. We know it's a lot of work, and we're grateful for their efforts and their work that they've done. We pray again that thy Spirit will be with us this hour and through our beloved.
Thank you. I'm gonna get my glasses on so I can. We're grateful for Jason Whiting to be here with us. Jason is a PhD and is professor and director of program of BYU. Is healthy and unhealthy marriages. He's an author of the Love Me True, Overcoming the Surprising Ways. And he's written other books and articles. Jason and his wife, April, have been married for 27 years. And I'm looking at him and he says, have you been really married for 27 years? That's wonderful. 6 children and a beautiful daughter-in-law. Enjoys books, being outdoors, playing guitar, and being serious, folding piles of laundry. I think we all need to, take his fleet on piles of laundry that we all have. Turn the time over to Brother Whiting.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with all. Yeah, I do get occasionally told that I look younger than I am. I did a presentation like this years ago for my stake, and the stake president's wife came up afterwards and she said, I gotta tell you, I thought, what is this 26-year-old going to teach us about marriages? And I'm actually, I'm 51 at this point, so I'm not. If I don't have credibility today, it won't be because of my age, it'll be for other reasons. So, but it's nice to be with you. I was also told that when I get up here, I was supposed to do something impersonating a catcher. And that's what I was told would happen, and I don't know why. I know it's hard to follow Brad Wilcox, though, and he's a good fellow professor at BYU. But as mentioned, yeah, I've been at other universities, and I'm a marriage and family therapist and a professor, and I train and teach and talk about how to help folks. And I've kind of drifted the unhealthy, and so that relates to things like control and addiction and abuse, and I'm seeing some of you nodding your heads, right? These are tough things. Relationships are just hard, right? We want to be in relationships, at least most people do, but they're challenging, and we have a lot of things that make those things. Here, Life After Divorce conference at BYU. Kinds of conferences and the kinds of different family formations people are in, given the struggles that go on today. Let's start with a story. This was years ago when I was a young therapist, and this guy really discouraged, and I'm kind of mad at God and time. In church service, I help out people in my congregation, and I spend long evenings, and I pay my tithing, and marriage is terrible, and my kids don't like me, and my wife and I are always just annoyed with each other. And as we got talking about it, he was right that he was spending a lot of time in those things. He was doing a lot of good stuff in a lot of ways, but at home, he and his just cranky and abrasive and sarcastic, and so it made me think about this issue of and just general principles of human relations. Jesus talked about those who pay tithes but omit the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. And this guy kind of had that going on, where he was doing these external things really well, but in other ways, in interpersonal ways, he wasn't. And neither was his wife. And so they were, I think of it like they were watering to be. I've studied these project right now where we're interviewing people from all over the place, asking them about healthy versus unhealthy things that happen in relationships. And it seems really basic, right? It seems like we should all kind of get this, but it's surprising that there's not much out there in terms of an accepted definition of what's good and what's bad. And so when we talk about things, certain things are problematic, physical violence or other things like that, but other kinds of treating each other, it's a little more tricky. So that's what I'm trying to sort through. So I'll be talking about some of that today, and how, and hopefully lives or relationships you've been in or are in or might be in or whatever. I hope that it's helpful as you just kind of sort through, and but we'll see. So we know from a gospel perspective, we're all about marriage and family, right? We talk about it, we have doctrines related to it, and that's both good and can also be challenging, right? If we sometimes feel those pressures or feel inadequate at times. Families and relationships are hard. And these days, there's a lot of hard things out there. And if we had time, we could go around and hear various thoughts on this, right? I think of external pressures to relationships. So we're busy. We have a lot of distractions, right? There are a lot of things coming from screens. In terms of contention, there's a lot of contempt, there's argumentative stuff, there's very kind of stir people up, and that leaves people kind of wiped out. And then of course there are things that are designed their own biases, a lot of kind of how to respond in a family wounds, so that they are are going to overreact to certain things, right? And then people start doing that to each other. It's tricky. Some people are just more gifted and work harder at and do better in relationships, and for others there's just more things getting annoying. It's just hard. In fact, I was just thinking about, even in my own family, as was mentioned, I've got a daughter-in-law, and actually next month as well, so there's a lot going on in my family. And a little while ago, we were in a family home evening kind of situation, and it was a little chaotic, and one of the kids had a Nerf gun, you know what I'm talking about? He was running around shooting it at the other children. And I was like, hey, knock it off, it's not helpful. Somebody's gonna get hurt. And then my wife, she was like, no, Jason, nobody's gonna get hurt. They're Nerf bullets, they don't hurt anyone. She picked it up, she shot it, and it hit my proving my point. It was a loose tooth, to be fair, but
finish it off.
so and just lots of stuff. Right? I was actually talking to this is just a few days ago. I was talking to a couple, and we were talking about all the challenges that they have in their life, and they have a lot of kids and busy jobs and callings. And as we were talking, we would hear the screaming and pounding on the door, and they're like, oh, sorry, she's running to go help, and then come back, and then you could hear her say, and then he's like, I'll go handle it, and he went and handled it, came back, and I said, this is like a metaphor for your life, right? Just the things going on. And as we were talking about that, he looked over and he's like, oh, great, there's a folded up note being slid under the door. And I was like, here you are paying money and coming to therapy and spending this time, and you can't even pull that off, right? It's just, that's the kind of situations a lot of people are in. Sorry. So anyway, let's talk about what I call practices, relationship practices. These are just patterns, they're interactive patterns, healthy or unhealthy. Because they involve effort, they're interactive, and they happen over time. Everybody's gonna have glitches and goods and bad moments, but healthier relationships tend to have certain kinds of things going on, as do unhealthy relationships. Regardless of, and this is one of the things we're looking at in the research, regardless of what Spain or Japan agrees on certain kinds of things being not so good. So let's talk about the first one. The first one is what could be called respect. And again, this sounds really basic, right? We kind of know. It's surprising how often people shift into not respectful. So, just interactions that send a message that the other person is of value, that they are worth treating well, right? And this can happen in 1,000. One of our research participants means not faulting people for telling you what they think, also means being able to make a mistake and have the other person not jump all over you or be upset. A lot of people would talk about these attributes when we talk about respect, like gentleness, kindness, patience. So I think this type of interaction, that's a respectful interaction, captures a lot of those kinds of ways that people are, these virtues. And that's when someone comes to us for help, for example, we're not it's not about skills, right? It's not about, you can learn skills, and it's not bad to learn skills like good sending and good listening and summarizing, and those are fine, but if people don't have respect for the other person, it doesn't really help. Like, you can learn communication, used car salesman. Relationship, you have to have the other person's best interests at heart as well. So those are more foundational, the attitude of respect. So I think my in-laws, for example, my father-in-law is gone now, and they're from a very, very much a different generation, but they were always just very kind and relaxed with each other. And they never had any marriage prep classes or skills. They just had that goodness about them and worked at it and got better over the years. So, this is a kind of attitude that's helpful. It also, when they do research about what kinds of relationships last the longest, these kinds of things come up. Just be nice to each other, right? Challenging in a marriage at times. Another research study that I'm citing there mentioned want to feel valued and validated, like that our lives and our opinions are relevant, and another person maybe good listening. And when that cycle, people tend to do it back and forth if both are trying. Now, I'll say this too. One of the things that comes up, again, I told you I study like intimate partner violence and controlling relationships. Sometimes what happens is one person is trying and they're like, how can I be a better spouse? And the other person is not trying and they're like, you got to do all this stuff and be a better spouse. And that obviously happen is one is sort of to be more Christ-like, and even like, you got to forgive me and you got to be better. Well, the person saying that is not necessarily. This is where it gets a little tricky when relationships are out of balance, unhealthy or controlling dynamics. Okay. A good quote on this idea of gratitude from President Nelson. He says, grateful partners look for the good in each other and sincerely pay compliments to one another. The persons described in those compliments. It's a nice quote because how many of us have ever felt unappreciated, right? Especially in a relationship. We all feel like, man, my spouse doesn't know how hard my job is, or how hard it is with the kids, or how much I've cleaned places in the house. I'll be like, hey, honey, see what I did? And again, we all kind of know our own problems to be clearer than our spouses. In fact, when they've done research asking people, what marriage do you do? Guess what happens? The numbers that they both give always add up to more than 100. I think, oh man, I'm doing like 80% here. And, anyway. And it's just one of those things that people think they're probably. A respectful interaction, you can even get through pretty difficult conflict, for example. Conflict is inevitable. I don't know of a relationship where there wouldn't be some kind of relationships by definition are two or more people. And people are all unique, and so they're going to have differences, right? So you sometimes hear people, are caused mostly by money, or whatever, but I would just say it's areas where you're always going to have differences, period, on all those things. But what happens can become either like a point of contention and arguing and even like contempt and eye-rolling, or through them with patience and with compromise. And I know it's hard. I know that sometimes things aren't ever solvable. Some of these differences. And some are bigger than others, again, as I'm sure some of you have experienced. But the point is that if people can handle differences in a way that still maintains each other's dignity, you'll do better. People are growing together and they're learning and they're being patient. Right? People get closer. But if they don't and they're not handling those things very well, then they become further apart. Of respect. And again, it's surprising to me that folks who I meet with, who might be the pillars of their community or even of their ward, who would never treat friends in certain ways, feel free to treat their family members in aggressive or difficult ways. And that's sad. Again, there may be just problematic histories there or whatever, but for various reasons. but it doesn't help, right? What's that?
That's mature.
Does that get relationships? I thought of this phrase in the Doctrine and Covenants: others suffer, right? That's a bad mode. If you're in that mode of like, you should be punished, and that's not a good sign. People get in that mode when they're in pain or when they're in their own insecurities or whatever. To condemn not, there's a lot of that going on in some family relationships, and those are divorce predictors, right? When people are showing this attitude of just like, I don't care about you. You're kind of disgusting, really harmful stuff. So let me give you another example. One time I was at work and I saw a text from my do you know where the bread maker is? And I thought, I don't know where the bread maker is. Let me keep going. So about 30 seconds later, I'm still working, and then I see she's calling. And my first thought was like, oh man, I'm busy here trying to write a book. But maybe it was because I was doing that, I was like, all right, I'll stop and hey, what's going on? Do you know where this is? No. But right in that moment, and this is a real typical marriage interaction, right? 1,000 different ways. Let me just break this down a little bit. So I could have ignored it, and I kind of like, okay, I should respond. This is my spouse, and clearly it must be a little bit important. I could have been rude. Could have been like, why are you bothering me? I've got lots of stuff going on. Here very often. I could have made a sarcastic comment. Yeah, I brought it with me. Marriage and family therapy. I could have just been sort of dismissive and been like, no, sorry, bye. Or I could have been, maybe joking about it and whatever. Yeah, I keep it with me all the time. There's just, again, infinite number of ways. I could have been understanding, and I tried to be that way. I probably could have done better at this, but I was like, no, I haven't seen it, sorry. Maybe the kids, and we talked for just a couple of minutes, and then. But I maybe could have done better and been like, sorry, how's your day, whatever. The point is, actions in our relationships, and people don't think about any kind of, we call these bids, just a little throw out to the other person. Whatever comes back is actually really important. And they've done some research on this, and they found, this is a guy named John Gottman, he found that after 6 years, he researched them when they got married, and then 6 years later, had responded that were connectors 86% of the time, positively. So these are like, hey, how's the weather? Or, oh, I saw a car today that reminded me of our random stuff. The kids were driving me crazy today. Whatever this thing happened at work. People that respond to each other with just positive to neutral ways. It's important. And struggling couples, including those that were is about a third of the time. That's a big difference. 86%. Again, think of respect and like throwing something out, and if somebody ignores you, it's kind of hurtful, right? Yeah. Right? Just be thoughtful about the kind of reaction. Let's talk about a different one, a different healthy relationship practice. This is honesty. And as mentioned, I've written a book exploring the different ways people literal meanings of words, right? I like that scripture, they that deal truly. Here's a good quote from Elder Worthland a few years ago, living truthfully. He says it's to be free of deceit, cunning, hypocrisy, and dishonesty in thought or action, including honest intent and pure motives. So it's not just about, meant this, it's these sort of people of integrity and authenticity. It's a challenge, and sometimes people wanting to appear a certain way, but not really being that way. fact, I was, and she said her husband would be pretty mean and harsh in private, but then in public he would give her these kind of elaborate gifts. And she would say, I could tell it wasn't about me, it was about him proving what an amazing husband he was and telling everyone, showing it, people on Facebook. And then at home his words didn't match that. So here's a good quote. Most forms of private vice and public evil are kindled and sustained by betrayals, financial fraud, government corruption, even murder and genocide, generally require an additional moral. This guy is a scientist and atheist. Just saying, in human relationships, specifically as I started studying unhealthy, abusive relationships, there's always these distortions and these excuses. Let's talk about a few of those here in just a second. So here's President Hinckley again talking about guile and falsehood. Pretty tough to be that way fully. Okay, I've always liked Calvin and Hobbes. Here's a good comic. He's saying, today, cheat on my test or not? Or is it better to do the wrong thing and succeed? On the one hand, undeserved success gives no satisfaction, but satisfaction. Of course, most everybody cheats sometime, and they think they can get away with it. Then again, that doesn't justify my cheating. Then I thought, look, cheating on one little test isn't such a big deal. It doesn't hurt anyone. But then I wondered if I was just rationalizing my unwillingness to accept the consequences of not studying. About success, not principles. Then what a dilemma, Hobbes. So what did you decide? Nothing, I ran out of time and I had to turn in a blank paper. So Hobbes says, any more simply acknowledging the issue as a moral victory? Well, it just seemed wrong to cheat on an ethics test. Stuff, right? And here you can see. Okay. The opposite of honesty. There's a lot of different ways people become distorted and deceptive. It's just seemingly the way we're justifying ourselves. But in certain situations, especially in some unhealthy situations like addiction or abuse, pervasive rationalization and blame and stuff. So anyway, it shows up a lot. Here's one of the ways it shows up. Exaggeration. I like that second quote. I've exaggerated. And maybe it's not. That's right. Excuses. I picked a fight I shouldn't have picked, and I justified that by thinking, it's just secondary to what you did. And then another guy, no way else to release my anger, so I'll go talk to some woman or go out to some bar. People make excuses, right and left, right? It starts little kids, right, make excuses. In fact, a few years ago, I was at a they're like 3 and 1, and the 3-year-old, why did you? Well, he was making me mad. And I mean, it's just like behavior. I was like, man, we are fighting against the natural man. That's amazing. Blame. All the time in abusive relationships. Become mean and aggressive and physically abusive. And then do the apologizing thing and say, well, it's your fault anyway. And on until I started believing it. This dynamic of blaming the victim for their own hurt and their own mistreatment happens all the time. And then that confusion that results of like, well, maybe I did do something wrong. It's pervasive. This term, this just came up in an interview I was looking at the other day, but it's a perfect encapsulation of the gaslighting description that you've heard. I say, well, this is what happened. Or you're wrong, or this is not the problem, you're wrong. Right? Just continuing to kind of deny the facts or the reality of what is going on. I was thinking of a therapy situation. This woman and man were describing this interchange where he said she was getting really mad and she was blaming me because she couldn't find her phone, and on her side of the bed, kind of in her stuff. And she said, well, at other times you've taken it. And he said, when have I ever taken your phone? And she said, well, you know, and she kind of kept going on to the next sort of like, you're back. There's always an excuse, there's always a reason. Like, that's not a good sign when somebody's making excuses that way. Okay. Purpose me, even if I make her own case. Another thing people do, which is kind of interesting, is they not only make excuses, but they claim that this excuse, this thing that they're doing, the only reason I did this is to teach you a lesson. Remember, I've heard that in like abusive relationships. Wow, you're so generous to do. Make up excuses. I'll say that way. I'll try to hype myself up, make myself look better. Interaction here. So this is, we videotape some couples and watch them. And as I read through this, just listen and see if you can get a feel for what's going on here in terms of distorting things a little bit. This guy says, you think I'm always mad about something, and every time I say something, you always snap back, but I don't mean anything by it. Coming across real irritable and real. See how? I guess I'm not seeing it. All I help you with this and that, and all you ever say is nothing. Or I'll do this, fine. I don't feel like I deserve. So let's break this down a little. You see some of these red words, that sticks out to me. Extreme language, like, even though I'm being snippy to you, but I'm doing it in a way to be helpful. Whereas yours, magnanimous and helpful. And then he said, all you ever say is nothing. You can guess that if you hear things like always and never, there's probably some exaggeration going on, right? What relationship is always characterized by certain things? I don't know. This example of this guy kind of hyping himself up, saying, my snippiness is helpful, yours is not. There's another study this guy did where he asked people, think of a time when somebody made you angry. Think about that. And then he said, think of a time you made someone else angry. And what he found was the stories differed. If I'm describing a time I made someone else angry, I would say I had a good reason to do it. You can see the perpetrator story up here. I had a good reason to do what I did. It was just fair, and they overreacted and they need to get over it. But if somebody made me angry, I say something like, well, here's just another hurtful thing, and they were trying to be cruel, and it's really damaging, and I'm not going to forget it. So do you see what's going on here? We make excuses for our own behaviors, and we kind of hold other people more accountable than we do ourselves. We claim others' intentions are worse than our intentions are, if that makes sense. But basically, he said, this was really interesting. The same people have different kinds of stories. They're just biased towards making themselves look better. Anyway, okay, let's you remember that story I was telling you about the woman with her phone, which she couldn't find, and she kept blaming everyone else for what was probably just her misplacing her phone. A responsible person would just say, oh, right? But that's hard to do for some people, but it's a healthy attribute in interactions. And like I said earlier, it's when you see things like unhealthy, addictive behaviors, people have a real hard time taking responsibility because it's painful stuff. So There's also a interesting research study where a guy at the University of Texas, he recorded, and he found that the more one word kept showing up, the less healthy the relationship was. Any idea what that word would be?
Hate.
The word, it's not a bad word, it is you. Y-O-U. The more people use that word, the more they are usually in a blaming mode, not taking responsibility mode, and accusing mode, right? People don't like it. We don't like to be accused or pinned down on things. Here's another interaction. This is a better one of people, I think, taking responsibility or trying to take responsibility. So see what you think. He says, I just have to learn to accept that people say things differently. You say things different than I do. She says, but I also need to accept that it can't is going to cause consequences in our relationship. I know I need to make the effort to talk to you more, just like you need to make the effort to call and see how I am doing. I need to make you feel good too. I can't just expect it to be you, it takes two. I know I need to get over the fact that I need to take care of my dirty habits, or that you need to chill out more. Well, I need to chill out a little. You can be more clean. Let's meet in the middle. That's what I was saying. So that's pretty good. I'm highlighting some, maybe not perfect, but you can see the words here. And you remember what I just told you about that word you? Look at what these guys are doing. They're mostly saying, I need to learn this. I need to accept the fact. That's pretty good responsibility in action. And I will say there are some people who never, and again I'm using that word, but almost never, take responsibility. Or if they do, it's sort of a placating way. Like, sorry, not really a genuine, I'm sorry I hurt you, but it's like, I'm sorry you are upset. Important. The opposite of responsibility would be excuses or defensiveness or not owning up to your own stuff. I like that scripture. That's Nephi getting on his brothers. He says they revile against the truth because the words of truth are hard against all uncleanness. People who are doing right, but if you want to make progress and if you want to make changes together, you have to say, okay, I did something wrong. I'm sorry. I genuinely hurt you. I can see that now. I was in a bad place, right? That's a really key attribute for growth, taking responsibility and not making excuses. In fact, when we talk about things like 12-step groups for addiction recovery or batterer intervention groups for abuse recovery, it starts with saying, I have a problem and I need help, right? The people who are in denial, as we talk about, or defensive, they're not changing because it's not their problem, it's someone else's problem, right? So sometimes people ask me, can he ever change? Can she ever always change? But if they're going to do it, it's hard work and they've got to start with this kind of thing, with taking responsibility for and owning up to their stuff. Here's a couple more quotes from, I'd feel horrible about the physical abuse, and then later I would think, what might not have happened if she would have kept her mouth shut? So, pretty bad, right? Like you hear this guy sort of, his conscience is working on him like, I don't feel good about hurting my spouse, but then he shifts into excuse mode. And I've heard that version of that excuse so many times in domestic violence. And then this woman, she says, I hate to blame this on my parents, but my mom always had to be right. I can't remember a single time growing up when she ever said, I'm sorry. Not that she's responsible for my actions, but I tend to be the same way. I'll say, it's too bad you feel that. I'll find all ways to get around acknowledging fault. So, that's a good sign. She's recognizing her own struggle to be accountable. Okay, let's shift to another attribute here of humility. This shows up a lot. We sometimes talk about like fairness in relationships. It's an important thing that if you're going to be in a relationship, people recognize that it's challenging because at times you have to put your needs second, and both people have to do that. And again, if only one is doing it, that's a problem. I'll get to that here in a second. But fairness and humility is, it's a little bit ironic also, is that when people try to be humble and fair with each other and both are doing that, then they each tend to benefit, right? in a healthy relationship, there should be a decent feel of back and forth. The last time, we went to where I want to go out for dinner, so let's go out to where you want to go this time, right? Or a compromise like, I don't know if I really see it that way, but okay, I can acknowledge where you're coming from. Like there's just this sense of sometimes you kind of just put the relationship ahead of your own self. And there's a quote from a woman who was talking about sharing the chores. They did another research project where they asked people to think back over the last year and think about their most significant disagreement. And people have pretty big disagreements, but this time, for half of the couples, they said, I want you to write about that disagreement, but write about it from the perspective of a third party. Like a good friend of yours, how would that friend write about this disagreement with the intention to be fair and helpful? And when people would do that and they write about it, and I've actually done this for some of my own disagreements, it helps shift you in a different mode. You can say, well, I guess she was probably thinking this, and she was probably feeling frustrated that I was doing this, right? It just kind of pulls you out of our natural selfish mode. And in that experiment, in that study, the couples that did that indeed had an easier time getting over it. They were happier. They were like, okay, I see it a little differently now. It kind of goes against our grain, but it's helpful to step back and be humble. There is, of course, doctrines of humility in the scriptures. I was thinking about Emma Smith because she was actually told, in section 25, she was told, continue and beware of pride. That was to Emma. And then I thought of this instance where Joseph went up to translate the Book of Mormon, and he couldn't do it. And this is as recorded by Oliver Cowdery, I think. And then something had happened with Emma that he was upset about, so he went down and he started talking to her, and they went out and talked for like an hour outside. And then he came back, and he was good, and he could translate again. And I was like, that's a super fascinating story to me, because it was like he was still in this bad or angry or whatever it was. He had to go humbly and maybe ask for forgiveness or whatever to get into a mode where he could be in tune with the Spirit. I also like the story of Lehi and Sarai, where, of course, she, thinking that her sons have died because he sent them back to Jerusalem, gets on his case and complains, by Nephi's account, and calls him visionary man, etc. Well, again, remember our discussion about bids? He could have gotten upset. He could have been like, hello, I am a visionary man. Why are you trusting me? He could have, gotten aggressive or defensive. But he didn't. Nephi reports that he comforted her, and he talked about the goodness of God, and I trust in the Lord, and he kind of focused on that, and he didn't worry about being right. Okay. So the opposite of humility is pride, or we would sometimes call it entitlement, sort of this self-focus. Have you ever heard people where they get really bent out of shape? This shows up a lot, like in therapy. And again, this is a very self-centered mode of like, who, if he felt like his kids weren't doing what he thought they should do, it was all about respect to him. And so he would get really mad. And one time he came in the room and the light was left on. And he went kind of crazy and lashed out at his teenager, and they got aggressive. And it was all because he said, well, I've told him so many times, and he doesn't respect me as a father. And that's a sense of his own importance, and he's being easily offended by something that he doesn't. It's just about people kind of doing their own thing, not good. That's kind of shifting into unrighteous to me. Here's a quote from somebody we were talking to just recently. She said, I felt like I was doing 99% of them while he was working and playing video games. And I was watching our daughter, and he would only interact with her during the 10 minutes we were doing her bedroom routine. Decision making. What we should do, then he would blow up, and then I would often just give in and feel like it was what he wanted more than what I wanted. He would always say it's our money, but his behavior didn't match that. He got the final say in what we did with it. Okay. And there's a good quote from President Benson. He probably had this sense of enmity. let's talk about the last one. We've just got a few minutes left here. Freedom is an important attribute. Being told what you should think about something. If you like being told how you should feel about something or what you have to do. Most adults don't like it. And it happens sometimes. People say, well, I'm not being controlling, but people convey in a lot of different ways that they think the other person should think or feel or do something. And we have to be really careful about that again in relationships. I was observing a case at BYU, this is some years ago, and it was a young couple, and the young wife was really insistent that her young husband should be just like one of the members of the 12. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty tough standard, especially since we don't even know, what that person's personal life or marriage is exactly like. But she was sort of using that, and at one point, the president to talk about all the ways that he should improve. And I was pretty concerned about that, right? That's not a great way to start a marriage with this set of, 300 things he has to do. And so in relationships, obviously, it helps to have a sense of openness, to allow people to be who they are, to have their own opinions, and sometimes that is difficult, but there should be a balance there. I really like Sister Hinckley's quote on this. This is Gordon Hinckley's wife. She said, "Early accustomed to one another and constantly trying to change each other, which I discovered was impossible. There must be a little give and take and a great deal of flexibility." Right? You have to allow people to be who they are going to be. Married to a future apostle and prophet, right? It was probably pretty good. There was another story that friend, he had grandparents that when his grandfather died, they were cleaning out his garage, and behind one of the tool racks, they found hundreds of tightly stuffed down Snickers wrappers. Wow. What was going on was that he wasn't allowed to eat candy. Always sneaking out to the garage to have a Snickers. So over the decades, he was having his candy bar, even though his wife didn't want him to. He was busting his chops for having a candy bar, right? That's kind of a tough thing to live under. Another good quote. When I was a BYU student in the Marriage and Family Therapy program, one of my professors was Wendy Watson, and she's now married to President Nelson, of course. She was a good right a door or two down from where mine is now. So I was reading President Nelson's biography. It's really good. In here, and these are. She was a marriage and family therapist, and he was an apostle. Nevertheless, still was challenging. She said, "The beginning of our marriage was more difficult and required my life." It's a pretty strong statement. Those struggles turned me even more to the Lord, which in turn strengthened our marriage. To create the kind of marriage we forgiveness and prayer from both of us in the beginning as we intertwined our lives to become one, and it was worth it. So I just like that quote. It's but still challenges to have to work through to accommodate and to adjust to each other. So and we've talked about this, but when people try to, as the scripture says, exercise control or dominion or compulsion, right, on each other, does not work well. It shouldn't happen from a priesthood perspective. It shouldn't happen in a marriage. The heavens withdraw themselves. People don't like it. No one likes it. I have an aunt and an uncle that was a remarriage situation. And my aunt had 5 daughters and 1 son, and her new husband had 7 daughters and 1 son. And so it was this huge new family of 12 daughters, 2 sons, and people. They served as mission presidents, but it was hard. And I remember him telling me, he said, "We just realized a lot of stuff, right? We're just different people." And that's hard. It genuinely is. We We always think the things that we have or our opinions are correct. I certainly shift into that mode. My version is superior, but that's just not how it always works, and it's even good for us to be challenged and to have varying perspectives. So we have to be careful to controlling and pushing our view and be open to others. So here's a few cartoons where her marriage and this issue of control. She says, it really bothers me. And he says, but he watches them with you anyway. You're focusing on the wrong part of the story, the part that makes him look good. Yeah. He seems unhappy whenever we fancy restaurant. He says, so he doesn't seem to like the things he doesn't like. What do I do about that? Buy him some acting lessons. He says, he'll be happy and I'll be unhappy. So you're unhappy now. We're both unhappy now. It's balanced. That's why my marriage will last a long time, or at least it'll feel like a long time. Doesn't work too well, right? Okay. These things again in your own situation. Some of you, I'm sure, have been through some really tough things, and I know there's a lot of ups and downs in life. I know there's a lot of trials, but I also know there's a lot of help. There's a lot of healing to be found, both from friends and the gospel, professional help, on and on. So I have faith. I do wish you well, and I appreciate that you're all here with each other, trying to think about things and moving forward. So thanks for having me here, and good luck, everyone.
Would like to thank Jason for being here, and I guess we go in the center.
We change our names now.
Change their names.
We have a meagle, and then please don't enjoy the meagle, and then the other session